Time to wrap up a very busy 2-week stretch for the UFC. Their third show in 8 days has just come and gone. We're here to talk about it all and see where they go from here. I'm Mario Helwani. That is Brett Okamoto, Mark Ramundi as well. Good to be back doing these post-fight wrap-ups again. And guys, so much to discuss, so much to digest and dissect from these past 2 weeks, and in particular, the 3 cards that have come and gone from Jacksonville, Florida. Brett, I'll start with you. Usually we end with the biggest takeaway of the night. We'll ask you this. What's your biggest takeaway of the past 2 weeks since the UFC started fight week in Jacksonville around 2 weeks ago, and now here we are wrapping it up, and of course the 3 events in between? What's your biggest takeaway?
I'll tell you what, man. My biggest takeaway is that this worked. I think that for the most part, the reports coming out of Florida from people on the ground, people I spoke to, it was all very encouraging to hear. I think that we were all happy to get back into the fight conversations. We were all happy to start talking about, Conor McGregor fighting. Can he weasel his way into the lightweight title picture? To Justin Gaethje, his performance against Tony Ferguson, and just the way the different divisions are shaking out. We'd love to get into those conversations about sports, but I think really one of the biggest questions coming into all of this was, how's it going to go? Because the UFC was trying to do it before everybody else. And, they had the Jacare situation. I think that was handled fairly well. I think that there were some mistakes that they made with the Jacare situation, but the good news is that this went fairly well, and it's only going to get better. I think that first off, if and when they are able to bring it to Vegas, they're just going to have a situation that is just built more for this than Florida was. And also, I think just that the technology is going to get better. The testing is going to get better. The public's appetite and feeling towards, the health risks of this, I think is going to continue to get better, hopefully. So to me, that was the biggest thing. We all missed fights, and then we got 3 fight cards in 8 days. And I don't see it slowing down based on anything that happened as of up to this point. I don't see, a reason to stop putting them on.
Mark, you did extensive reporting leading up to the first card in Jacksonville, UFC 249, and also leading up to their failed attempt to put on a card on April 18th. Now that it has come and gone, all 3 events, what's your biggest takeaway?
I think very much the same as Brett. I would say a week ago when UFC 249 was happening, the day before that, Jacare Cejudo tested positive for COVID-19. And at that point, I think there was consternation, right? I think there was some worry that, okay, maybe this is not going exactly the way everyone thought it would and could. And personally, going into UFC 249 that night, just 24 hours earlier, someone tested positive for COVID-19. Jacare's corner tested positive for COVID-19. I was a little bit concerned myself. But now that we're a week after it, 2 fights cards, in addition to 249, have happened already. And it seems like everything ran smoother as the 8 days went. I'm feeling a lot better about it. I feel like the UFC did everything that they could possibly do. Like Brett said, there were some holes in the protocols that I'm sure they're gonna try to, fill up when they come back to Vegas, if that happens at the end of the month or in June. And just as everything evolves, they're going to be using the Smyrtle lab in Salt Lake City for testing when they go to Nevada, most likely, or if they go to California. So things are going to get better, as Brett said. I think that for the most part, being that this was the first time that a sport tried to do this, the biggest takeaway was, okay, we can get back to sports, at least some semblance of what sports look like moving forward.
Yeah, and I don't want to repeat what you both just said. Couldn't agree with you more. I also think that the fights were fun, so that's always good. But how about this? And I want to ask you about this, Brett. I have to say, I really enjoy the fights in the empty arena. I love hearing the punches. I love hearing the kicks. I love hearing the corners. The wrinkle, the storyline, if you will, last week with the fighters crediting Daniel Cormier with helping them out. I do not feel like the product has suffered one bit. And maybe we are programmed for this. Maybe we are built for this. We've been watching fights in empty arenas for 15 years on The Ultimate Fighter. This feels like high-level Ultimate Fighter fights. You're getting to see the best fighters in the world, big, important fights in this setting. I don't feel, of course, you miss the fans and the enthusiasm and the energy, but I really don't feel like anything is truly lost. And if anything, it's added a fun new element to these cards. Agree or disagree?
Agree for the most part. I mean, I think you're being slightly overly optimistic, or at least maybe more optimistic than I'm willing to be. Because I agree with you to the sense of it didn't really remove anything from it. I mean, we watched 3 fight cards, and there were times where I really would have liked fans there, but it the product didn't seem to suffer from it. The fighters' performances didn't seem to suffer from it. And for the most part, I didn't even really truly notice it all that much. I mean, when the fight gets going, you're focused on other things, and it's like, yeah, it'd be great to be a crowd. It really doesn't matter that there's not one there. When it did matter was world title fights, man. They need to be in front of fans. When Justin fought Tony and Tony dropped him in the second round in the final 10 seconds with an uppercut, that, you guys know what that sounds like in an arena. You guys know what the excitement level is. You guys know that buzz in that is in the arena during a moment like that. And that guy's got now, just a very short window in between rounds to try and pull himself together. And there's panic and there's chaos, and I felt it when Henry Cejudo retired too. I mean, he's sitting there screaming at the top of his lungs into the camera, and then he says, he's going to walk away from the sport for a little bit. I mean, those types of moments are better with the audience. They're better shared with a live crowd. But again, to your point, I mean, not too much was lost. I mean, I wasn't sitting there missing the crowd a lot, but when I did miss it, I did feel it.
Yeah, and it seems like with the way the testing has gone, and also with the way the fights have been put on without the fans, the floodgates might open now for the other promoters. I'm sure there are other boxing, MMA, kickboxing promoters who said this isn't all that bad, and the UFC has put out the blueprint. I don't subscribe to the theory that the UFC put out the blueprint for Major League Baseball or the NBA, but for fight sports, I feel like the UFC has now opened the floodgates. Mark, do you agree with the notion that now we're going to see a lot more combat sports beginning in June, because the UFC, credit to them, they were the first ones up, right? They were the first ones who did it, and for the most part, seems like it was a big success for them. Now we're going to see many more promoters start to get back on track as well.
I do think so. And I mean, the one thing that separates the UFC from most, if not all, the other promoters, guys, as we know, is just their resources and their money. I mean, they're able to put together a completely different fight week protocol step by step from when the fighters arrive to the hotel to the end of the week. And that requires resources. That requires a lot of more hotel rooms, individual workout rooms for fighters, COVID-19 testing, which is not cheap. I mean, it's not easy to get in some places, and it's not inexpensive. And hearing some of the things that other commissions are talking about, promoters are going to be required in some states like Nevada and California, most likely, to pay for those tests themselves. So which promoters can afford to do that? The UFC can, maybe Bellator can. I don't know about club show level promoters. I'm sure Golden Boy and some of the bigger boxing promoters can do it, but that's going to be a big question for me moving forward, is if the commission is going to require COVID-19 testing, which promoters are going to be able to afford to do that and run a show in an empty venue without a live gate. I know that's going to eliminate a lot of the club level shows and a lot of the small pro shows, the amateur shows in some states. So it's going to be very interesting to see. But yes, to answer your question, I do think that the UFC is going to, they've helped pave the way now for these fights to start up again.
All right, let's talk about the individual performances and the ones that shine most. Of course, I think we would all agree that the MVP of the past 8 days, Justin Gaethje, what a win, what a performance against Tony Ferguson, and everyone's still talking about it, and he's still in the news, and we all want to know what's next for him. And there's obviously some roadblocks, and you got the travel restriction and Khabib's, father being ill right now. But let's just say that all the stars align and everything is okay, and we hope, obviously, that his father makes a very speedy recovery. We wish the best to the Nurmagomedov family. Brett, how confident are you that Justin Gaethje versus Khabib Nurmagomedov will be next for both guys, that is the next fight in the lightweight division for the belt?
I'm very confident about it. I think that it would take some of those instances that you just talked about. That would be the only reason that we wouldn't see it. That's what Justin has said. We haven't really heard Khabib speak much. We can certainly understand why. But just judging by what you saw from Khabib in his interviews before all this happened, when he couldn't take the Tony fight, and then just some of his posts on Instagram, I mean, you can tell that he's upset that he missed this one. I think he wanted to compete. Contrary to a lot of conspiracy theorists out there that thought he ran from Tony, I think that Khabib wanted to fight this spring, and I think he wants to fight again as soon as possible. I think he's eager to get back in there, and he's going to want to fight Justin. Obviously, Justin wants to fight him. And the UFC seems very on board with that idea. They created that interim title. I think that they have to now unify it. And the big question, I guess, in the meantime, is that what happens with Conor McGregor. I'm sure you were getting to that. that topic. But as far as the actual unification bout, I think the only way it doesn't happen is if logistically, for some reason, they can't put it together.
Yeah, and that is the next question, Mark. That's a big debate. What do you do with Conor McGregor if, in fact, you make that fight, that title unification bout? So you're Dana White, you're Mick Maynard, Sean Shelby, Hunter Campbell. What do you do with Conor McGregor if that fight is booked next?
So this is kind of probably the biggest question that the UFC is going to face moving forward. Aside from all of the coronavirus and COVID-19 protocols, what do you do with Conor McGregor? Do you really want a Conor McGregor fight in front of no fans? Because that is the reality for the next who knows how long. And even Dana White has acknowledged that he's not even thinking about having a live gate. He's not even thinking about having fans at an event for the foreseeable future. What does that mean? Does that mean 2021? Does that mean the end of the year? I don't know. So do you want to have a Conor McGregor fight without fans? That is a huge question. And I think that there's still value to having him fight, right? Because there's still pay-per-view, and the UFC makes a lot of money on pay-per-view. Certainly they could do that. Who would that be against? Maybe possibly an Nate Diaz, someone like that, a Dustin Poirier. But I think that part of, and maybe this is speculation, but I think part of the UFC probably wants to maybe wait and have Conor fight the winner of Khabib versus Gaethje and maybe have it be in the beginning of 2021. But I know Conor wants to fight sooner, so it's going to be really interesting to see the kind of machinations that go into this decision.
You have a ready and willing Conor McGregor. You're not keeping him on the sidelines till 2021. That would be a shocking move on their part. You get him to fight anyone because you can make a lot of money off the pay-per-view. We saw how good the pay-per-view did last week as well. So yeah, I agree with you. It's going to be really interesting. Also really interesting is the heavyweight division, because we know about the stalemate between Stipe Miocic and Daniel Cormier. Cormier wants to fight in August. Stipe saying that he'd like it in the fall because of his job, his other job as a firefighter, and also his restrictions as far as training is concerned in the state of Ohio. But all of a sudden, we get this storyline that emerged this week between Jon Jones and Francis Ngannou. And Ngannou won last Saturday in 20 seconds, and it seemed like he was the odd man out. And there's Jon Jones now all of a sudden saying, I want in. Now, important to note, Jon Jones has done this before. He's teased us about going up to heavyweight before, and then he's like, LOL, JK. How real is this in your opinion? I can't believe I just said LOL, JK. I'm sorry about that, guys. How real is this, Brett, in your opinion? Does Jon Jones, in your opinion, really want to move up and fight Francis Ngannou?
For the right amount of money, right? I mean, that's usually what these things boil down to, I think. I mean, not always. Jon likes to play a little bit, but he also doesn't mind taking negotiations out in the public every now and then. We've seen this with other fighters too. And he mentioned it with the Dominic Reyes. I think, what was it, 2 days ago? He said, some fan asked him, "Hey, are you going to do the rematch again?" He's like, "Well, if the UFC wants to turn that into a super fight, a rematch, a lot of people thought that I lost. Let's get paid for it. Otherwise, I'm happy to just fight the next guy." I think that he's kind of laying the foundation for an ask of a bigger piece of the pie for his fights. And if he does fight Francis Ngannou, I do think that's a huge fight. I mean, you and I spoke on Saturday, and I said, hey, we might arrive at Francis and Jon Jones, because I'm not so sure that Stipe Miocic doesn't retire after he fights Daniel Cormier. I think that that's a real possibility that Daniel and Stipe could fight. They could both retire on the same night, which would be pretty incredible. And then what a great heavyweight fight that Jon Jones and Francis Ngannou. So I think that there is a lot of possibility for this. I mean, I was thinking that there was possibility of it before Jon put it out there. And I think that what Jon sees is he sees that possibility. So now by putting it out there and talking about it, again, he lays that sort of that groundwork for saying, hey, this is a fight that a lot of people want. I want, this is what I want to put it on.
Speaking of the heavyweight division, on Saturday night, we saw Alistair Overeem make a nice comeback against Walt Harris. Everyone obviously has a soft spot for Walt Harris and his family. So impressive how he has dealt and how his family has dealt with the tragedy involving his stepdaughter, Nia Blanchard. And to just see him walk out there with a smile on his face was supremely impressive. And he was this close to finishing Alistair Overeem in his first UFC main event. And what a scene that would have been. Unfortunately, it seemed like he got a little tired, and Overeem won the fight in the second round, minutes before he turned 40. And if it wasn't for, that loss to Jairzinho Rozenstruik with just 4 seconds left in the fifth round, he'd be on a 4-fight winning streak right now, Mark. How real is this run from Alistair Overeem? Do you think he actually has another title run left in him?
I don't see why not. I mean, the heavyweight division is so unpredictable. And like Brett just said, there's a good chance that we don't see Daniel Cormier or Stipe Miocic fight after 2020, their next fight. They could both retire. So then it opens up the doors for people like Alistair Overeem to kind of step in after his win against Walt Harris, which I thought was, he weathered the storm and did a nice job keeping his composure and eventually finishing that fight in the second round, which we've seen Overeem kind of do the opposite of that, where he is the hammer at first, then he becomes the nail late, and it kind of turned the other way for him this time around. So yeah, I don't see why not. I think he's still in top form. Overeem always seems to be able to reinvent himself when he needs to, and now that includes going to Team Elevation and training with those guys over there, training with Curtis Blades, a guy who I also think is possibly a future UFC heavyweight champion. So I do think so. I don't see why not. At 40, in a few minutes here, at least on the West Coast, yeah, I don't see why Overeem couldn't make another run toward a title shot at the very least.
Brett, I want to transition over to the bantamweight division because a week ago we spoke about Henry Cejudo, and I asked you if it was a work or a shoot, that he was really retired, right? And here we are several days later. He hasn't talked much, but he has been engaging online with the likes of Ryan Garcia, and did say at the post-fight press conference, Dana knows my number and all that stuff and more. So I want to ask you a two-part question. Number one, do you feel as though he is legitimately retired? Has your stance changed since last Saturday? And number two, you look at that pay-per-view card on June 6th, it's a little thin right now, right? With Amanda Nunes versus Felicia Spencer as the de facto main event. We know that there's been some talks of Corey Sandhagen versus Aljamain Sterling. It doesn't seem like Petr Yan can come over to the United States yet. Would you be in favor, if in fact he does stick to his guns and say, hey, I'm retired, putting that fight, Sterling Sandhagen, for the vacant title and beefing up that pay-per-view a little bit?
Well, to answer your first question, my stance hasn't changed. I think I don't think that there's necessarily been a development that would change my stance. I thought that Henry Cejudo has kind of made it clear by saying these things of money talks and Dana has my number, that he's saying, hey, if you pay me, I'll stick around, and if you don't, then I won't stick around. And I do think that if there's just no budging from the UFC whatsoever, that Henry, if he was smart at all, he must have already accepted this risk, right? He must have already thought to himself that if the UFC just simply does not budge and give me nothing, well, then what am I going to do? Am I just going to come back for exactly the same? I think that he's probably asked himself that, and I find him to be a little genuine when he's talking about, there are other things that I want to do in my life. I still think that he would like to fight. I still think that there are obviously plenty of big fights out there for him. I personally, as a fan of the sport, would love to see him continue to fight, but I think that just dismissing it outright and saying that this was all a work or a shoot, I still don't know the difference between them. I apologize for my lack of professional wrestling terms, but to say that it's all fake, I just think that that would be inaccurate. I do still think at the end of the day, he will fight again because he is 33. He's at the top of his game. He's, in my mind, the number 3 or number 2 pound for pound fighter in the world right now. So I do think he'll be back, but I don't think it's a certainty. And if he is gone forever or for an extended amount of time, I would be fine seeing Aljamain and fight Corey Sandhagen for the title. I don't think it's necessarily the fight that is the most obvious one of like, it has to be it. But to your point, they need to bulk up that June 6th card. I think it'd be very difficult to try to figure out how to get Petr Yan to Las Vegas, which is where they really want to hold that card in that amount of time. So if they wanted to create the title, I wouldn't necessarily be against it, but it's not to me. Sometimes in this sport, you see the obvious matchup and you say, well, yeah, if the champ is gone, that's the number 1 fight. Those are the 2 top guys. That's not really the case with that fight, but it's still a fight that would be worthy for a title if they did want to put it on the line.
Yeah, the next UFC event is scheduled for May 30th. Then it's the June 6th pay-per-view. Right now, the location for both of those TBD. As you mentioned, Brett, they want it to be in Las Vegas. They've got their Apex tailor-made for those, crowdless events, so to speak. It would just be perfect. It would make their lives easier. Dana White's saying at the post-fight press conference on Saturday night that they are hoping that they can do the events in Las Vegas. They're waiting on the governor of Nevada to give them the green light. If not, they're looking at Arizona. So that's a story to monitor as well. Mark, we'll end with your own 2-part question. Number one, what do you make of the judging over the last few days in Florida? You can make a strong case that the first 4 fights on the main card, this past Saturday, Harris Overeem card, were the wrong one, right? Like the wrong winner won the fight. It was very bizarre. And perhaps more importantly than that, the biggest controversy, if you will, of the past 8 days happened in the main event on Wednesday. Anthony Smith, Glover Teixeira, Smith's corner, and the referee, Jason Herzog, taking a lot of heat, a lot of criticism about not stopping the fight earlier. Now that we are a few days removed from that decision. Eventually, he lost in the 5th round. What did you make of the decision to not stop the fight from both the corner and the referee?
It's funny, Ariel, because I'll start with Wednesday and the Anthony Smith-Glover Teixeira fight. When that happened and the big controversy around that fight and around that card and around, I mean, everything in MMA was all about, should that fight have been stopped sooner? Did Jason Herzog do a good job? Should Anthony Smith's corner have thrown in the towel? I was actually, and look, all respect to Anthony Smith. I hope he's okay and I hope he's healthy. It was actually nice to be talking about a controversy that was not involving COVID-19. It was almost nice that it almost felt like MMA was back, right? Because there's always these controversies that we talk about after these cards, and it almost felt like it was a breath of fresh air that we were talking about an MMA-related controversy. I do think that certainly the fight could have ended. There were certain periods. There was one point in the 3rd round that I thought that Herzog could have gotten Anthony Smith out of there. I thought there was points in the 4th round that the corner could have thrown the towel in, especially after the 4th round, going to the 5th, where it seemed like Anthony Smith was out of it. He lost his teeth in the 4th round. I lost my earbuds. It's been a little bit of a struggle here during quarantine. But yeah, I mean, I think it was a tough call. I felt like for Herzog that Glover was always 1 or 2 shots away from him ending the fight, right? It was almost like Glover would land damage on Anthony Smith and then go for a submission, and that kind of negated Herzog from stepping in. So it was a very tough call. And then the judging tonight, I mean, I don't know if the guys who were judging the fights in Florida this week for the last 8 days are maybe a little tired, maybe a little burnt out from 3, because it's all the same judges, right? They didn't go home. They've been in that hotel in Jacksonville for over a week now. I'm just joking. I don't think they were actually that tired, but yeah, I mean, I had some trouble with a few of the decisions tonight. I thought Angela Hill won the co-main event. I thought Edson Barboza won that fight against Dianige. But look, I mean, let's be honest. These were all very close fights. I didn't think anything was really that egregious. I thought they were all close. I didn't think there were any robberies. And the judges that were there, you can't blame the Florida Commission, because a lot of the judges that were in town this week in Jacksonville were judges from Nevada and California, and some of the best judges that judge fights all over the world for the UFC. So it really wasn't that. I think it's just one of those things. MMA is back. Officiating controversies. MMA is definitely back now, my friends.
Yes, and it has been fun watching these past 3 events over the past 8 days. We hope that you've enjoyed the coverage. Not like we're stopping. There's still a whole lot more to discuss in the aftermath of these 3 events. And of course, we wonder now where the next UFC event will take place. Again, that date is May 30th, not May 23rd. It was supposed to be May 23rd. They've moved it now to May 30th in hopes of securing that green light from Nevada. The main event for that card is expected to be Tyron Woodley versus Gilbert Burns, which would be a phenomenal main event. And then they return for their next pay-per-view, UFC 250, on June 6th. For now, though, we shall say goodnight. Great stuff, gentlemen. For Brett Okamoto, for Mark Ramundi, for our entire team, thank you so much for watching our coverage of a very memorable 8 days in the history of this sport. I have a feeling we'll remember this time for many, many years to come. For now, though, we shall say goodnight. Thank you again, and keep watching right here on the ESPN MMA YouTube channel. Good night.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.